AI is transforming the way we experience the world, from generating stunning visuals to composing music. But what about smell? One company is on a mission to digitize scent, envisioning a future where computers generate smells just like we create images and sounds today. And it's already happening. Teleporting the scent of a plum? That's actually possible right now. Sending a smellgram or receiving the scent of a newborn in your inbox? Maybe closer than you think. Their technology can even sniff out counterfeit Jordans. Join me on today's episode as we explore the fascinating future of digital olfaction with Osmo CTO Richard Wickham. Don't go away. Well, Richard, it's such a pleasure to see you here and have you on Kendall on Air. We've been hearing remarkable stories about all kinds of technologies of late. I'm sure you've heard of Sora, AI helping with visualization. And then, of course, AI has been also doing a lot with audio and sound. But I think smell and scent is quite new. So tell us about Osmo and, why the world should pay attention.
Yeah, so a little bit of Osmo's history and kind of people think of smell, they're always surprised. And it's always funny when I always ask people, tell people what I work on, they always have to pause and it takes them a few seconds to realize that what I said and then kind of think through the implications of it. But Osmo, our mission is to digitize smell for human health. And really what I was kind of focused on is that aspect of what does it mean to digitize smell? And that is kind of at the core of the company. Osmo, just kind of foundation, Osmo originally started from a small team that was led by our CEO, Alice Witchko, focused on trying to digitize a small portion of smell, which was, can you predict the smell of chemicals based by just looking at the structure of those chemicals? Then about 2 years ago, we rolled out a Google-informed independent company, really trying to go after a much broader sense of beyond chemicals. Can you digitize all smell? Can you, and what that means at the end of the day is, can you find a set of sensors that can look at the volatile chemical world around us, store that in some way digitally, and then possibly recreate that someplace else? And if you can do that, if you can read the world of volatile chemicals and the chemical world around us, store it, and then recreate it. For me, that is at the end of the day what it means to digitize smell.
Wow, that's really neat. So how did you, come to join this really creative and fun endeavor?
Yeah, it's funny enough, what I kind of think about it is most of my career has been in this intersection of ML, now deep learning, AI, big data systems, and really trying to bring these models as they got more advanced in my career to people so that they can make sense of them and kind of use them in their day-to-day life to perform better tasks. So in my past, what I like to say is I spent most of my career working on, up to this point, on hearing and vision, and now smell is the new sense for me. So the past 4 years before I joined Osmo, I was actually at Nvidia working on the self-driving car program. So mostly worked on the sensor, the big data system, the data collection, and the ML side of that, and building tools and kind of systems to help the researchers and people working on the car to build parts of it. And before that, I came from other big tech companies. Like before that, I was at Spotify, actually in the same building where we are now, working on playlist recommendation. And before that, I was at Twitter, working on computer vision, NLP, and kind of recommendations for social media.
Very cool. Right now you have these fragrances in front of us. I think fragrance is definitely the first market that Osmo is targeting, right? And you have these brand new product as well. But tell us a little bit about that, and then other applications that are kind of in the pipeline and in your vision.
Yeah. So the way to think about the fragrance industry is there's two aspects to it. One side of it is, what you can think about is the ingredient industry. So these are things like the ingredients that are put into your fragrances. And to be clear, fragrances are beyond just fine fragrances. You also think about candles, hand soaps, bleaches, laundry. Really anything that has a scent likely has behind it a perfumer who created a fragrance for that product. And almost all products that you would see kind of interact with the store has some fragrance added to it. That could be, even in the case of flavors, also have a kind of a flavor type recipe added to it. So the fragrance industry is split in two parts. The ingredient side is mostly focused on the ingredients that go into those fragrances. So one of the things we have done here at Osmo in the past 2 years is try to come up with and find new ingredients to sell to the fragrance industry. So what we have now is, I have 3 on the table here, but we now have 5 fragrances have passed the first round of regulatory hurdles, which means that we can sell it into the industry at 1-ton scales. And why this is important is beyond kind of what you kind of think about first, which is try to find new fragrances and maybe new smells that people don't have access to right now. Like a really nice leather smell is one that's actually hard to find in the industry, as an example. The industry also has a problem with a lot of ingredients being problematic and likely to be banned over the next few years. And these could be many different reasons. Some ingredients are known to cause kind of allergen reactions in humans when you put them on the skin. Other ones could be safe for humans, but really bad for the environment. They don't biodegrade in the waters and in the oceans and accumulate in fish. So there's a lot of ingredients in the industry that are problematic that the industry knows about and likely won't be available to be used in things like a Tide or Dove soap in the future. So when the core product areas going Osmo is try to find new ingredients to replace those problematic ones, so the industry can still make the smells that we just are comfortable with and know in our day-to-day life.
And I know you have, that very special product, which is, basically a bottle with a scent of plum. Of a plum, and you're able to also teleport that. So I thought that was, really neat. But what does that exactly mean, and what does that do?
Yeah, so what it means is, it's kind of go back to what I was saying at the beginning, where it's the job, what we're trying to do for Osmo is kind of read the chemical world, store it digitally, and recreate it. So what it comes down to, what it means to transport a plum, or really kind of anything, internally called sense of teleportation, is you have to somehow collect a real world sample, like a plum is a perfect example of it. You need to then have a sensor that can detect kind of in a chemical sense, so like what's in the plum. So here at Osmo, we use a piece of machinery called a GCMS, which is a sensor we have in our lab that can, essentially what you do is you crush up the plum, you heat it, and then you could take the air above the plum and put it through this machine. And the machine outputs a bunch of sensor information about different details of what it sees in that sample, or the headspace, it's the name for the top of the air. Then what we have internally is a model that can then digitally store the output of that sensor. And then also internally, we have a mixing robot, a liquid mixing robot. So then we have another model that could take that digital representation of a plum and recreate it with ingredients that we have on the robot, which is how we end up with what's on the table here, which is the scent of a plum. So it really comes down to having a sensor that can read the chemical makeup of something, have a model that stores it digitally, and another model that recreates it back into the world again with a robot.
Oh, so I guess that's kind of the formula that's replicable for your platform. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because it comes down to lots of things. Even if you know the chemical makeup of something, you can't always recreate it because you might not have access to those chemicals. So there's a step of what we call map internally, where you have to transform it into something else, where there's actually the chemicals you have on hand, so the ingredients that you use to remake it again.
So I'm curious, why a plum though? Could be watermelon or cherries.
Yeah, we actually picked a few to do internally. At the time it was a banana, plum, and passion fruit, but the plum was kind of the most interesting one in that sense that came out of it. And they all have, and they all worked in kind of different various ways too, but the plum was the one that was like the most evocative, I guess. And that's the one we
provocative.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
We use AI scent technology to tell real from super fake Jordans. As you can see, it's virtually indistinguishable from the logo, to the stitching, to the sole. We're going to do a chemical analysis to quantitatively analyze whether or not this is a real or a fake. All you have to do is get the shoebox close to the sensor, and so I'll just slide it in. It's smelling the inside of the shoebox. Just like our nose basically changes what it experiences over time, so does our sensor. Here comes the scent from the fake, which is much, much bigger and different than the signature for the real shoe. And then the signature for the real shoe pops up just a little bit later.
So like another thing we do here too is counterfeit detection, which sounds very different than the fragrance industry. But what it comes down to is instead of having like this big sensor in the lab that could detect a plum and kind of like look at its chemical parts, for things like fake Jordans, what we do instead is have a very similar type of sensor that we can take out of our lab into a warehouse. And then instead of trying to break down the plum into its parts, we can actually detect the fake, not fake presence of it too. What it really comes down to is instead of looking at like what's in a plum, you're looking at like the glues and the fabrics and the materials made for the shoe. And then the sensor with a model on top of it can tell does the glues and the fabrics match what a real Nike versus a fake Nike shoe.
Wow, that's fascinating. Oh, and I think in the long term, you know, Osmo also wants to transform the health and the wellness industry as well. So could you share a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so the way to think about this is, so we talked about plums so far, it had out of plums. We also talked about shoes and fabrics and glues. One thing that's been very heavily studied and in many different ways is when you have a disease or when you're like stressed, your body produces different hormones and chemicals, and those actually come out of your body in different ways. It might come off your breath, out of your skin. So there's many things you can tell about wellness and the health of someone just based on, essentially think about the smells coming off the human. And you probably have seen stories on this already where like dogs detect different cancers and different like Parkinson's. What they're detecting is the presence of chemicals coming off of us that are kind of the byproducts of stuff happening inside of our body. So the hope for Osmo is long-term is just as a dog can be trained or learned to detect cancer or diagnosis, there's no reason why a sensor that you have in-house or your doctor's office can take a same type of smell that's coming off of you and tell you if you have a different disease state or not.
Wow, so it's like odor diagnosis.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's really understanding like all the byproducts that are coming out of your body as you're sick change internally, so you can detect those, kind of either like say that like, okay, maybe you shouldn't work out today, or up to like, you probably should go to the doctor. Something's wrong here. Something has changed with you in the past few days.
Sure, and I know that this is like a long-term project, but how long do you think, you know, something like that, this could actually materialize?
Yeah, the two hard things to get there are really having a sensor that is small enough and accurate enough that can mimic a dog's nose. We have that right now, but it's in a lab. And it's also a very expensive sensor that can't go out into the wider world. So the question is, how do you get that capability into a sensor that can be in your doctor's office or kind of even at your house in the future too? And the other side too, which is my background, is to do that, to detect, let's say, a cancer or like maybe it's just high stress, you have to collect enough data to look for, like no one knows what the right chemical signature is that causes that to happen. So you really have to like be able to scale up and collect a large amount of data to then look for that signal in the noise and kind of figure out, okay, that's the signal for this one's stress. You're likely to get the flu or like possibly even that you have cancer and you should go to your doctor immediately.
So you mentioned sensor and, you know, signals as a potential maybe technical challenge to really scale. What are some of the kind of the more immediate challenges, or would those two be the immediate challenges?
Yeah, so on the fragrance side, most of the challenges are kind of just kind of continue to scale up and kind of work through all the different use cases because our models are now very, very good at doing fragrance creation, but we're now getting more into things like, well, how do you know if a candle is going to burn well over 12 hours? So different application areas there. And we have now labs of people doing things like doing laundry and burning candles so we can collect that data for us. But that is a focus area for us right now. And longer term, it's really thinking about like that mixture of like what's the right sensor with the right model that can solve different problems, and And also, really, like, we have a team who focuses on this. How do you collect kind of that, like, those volatile chemicals in the first place to bring back and kind of put to the sensor so you can collect that data? It's just a big challenge in that side also.
And I think with visuals or something like, color, RGB is the standard, right? So it's very easy to say something is something objectively, but I think smell and scent they're such a kind of a subjective kind of a sensory in some way. So do you think it makes sense to standardize smell down the road?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Rick Gerken, who was a professor at ASU but now works at Osmo, was in this field of olfactory neuroscientists who studied this question a lot. And what they found in a few different ways was smell is subjective, and there's a bit of like background and kind of culture part of it too. But if you train people and ask the right questions, what it really came down to is we smell the same way, but we have preferences of what things we like and don't like. So people do have nausea, which means we can't smell certain things. Like some people can't smell musk or different types of smells. But on average, if you take a large enough set of people, we all smell the same thing. Some people just smell slightly better than other ones, but we have vastly different preferences based on our backgrounds about like what we like and don't like about it. But with enough training, you can actually teach people to smell in a more objective way, which is closer to RGB in that space.
How do you train us how to smell or, what to like?
So it's not what to like. What you do instead is you train panels, which we do internally, on references. So you say, okay, here's 15 different references that smells of flowers. Then you can give another sample and say, okay, does this smell like flowers? And then what you're trying to do is match to the references. So this is how we collect our data internally and try to make it as objective as possible, because that's what the models really like to learn and want to understand the sense.
So if I understand what you just said correctly, there are colorblind people, but there are people that can't smell certain fragrances or scent. Is that?
Yeah, so lots of people can't smell certain molecules. And you wouldn't know it until you actually
even if like their nose was fine and nothing was wrong with their sinus. Okay.
Yeah, because certain people, kind of similar, like some people can see colors better or colorblind, you said. So there are people who actually smell better than other people, and they're much better smellers. There's also other people who are average smellers but just can't smell certain things because something about their nose or in the brain prevents them being able to smell something too.
I see.
And the same way too, you also can lose your smell for things like COVID and other places too, which sometimes returns, but other times doesn't return as strong with it. So there's all different types of anosmias within people of what they can and can't smell.
And I want to also ask you about, because this is definitely a new technology, ethical considerations, because I think, with any kind of new technology, people just don't know what to expect, what, these things can do, right? So there are always question marks. And I believe smell is definitely something that can be manipulated, right? So what is Osmo's kind of, point of view on that? Are we setting up guardrails of such,
Yeah, so the big thing to focus on, when I mentioned before, the read and the map and write. So when we read the world of smell or just, it'll come up in general. There could be anything there because that's the real world. When we go and try to recreate that smell someplace else, and the teleport part of it, all of the ingredients that could go into that smell have gone through regulatory approval. So these are ingredients that are safe for humans and also safe for the environment, which is a big thing for us also. So we know going in that when we recreate a smell, it's safe for people and also for the environment because of the tests done on each of those ingredients. The thing though is that just because it's safe doesn't mean it smells good. So you can have some very bad smelling molecules and chemicals that are safe for you, but you also don't necessarily want it to smell too. So at the end of the day, it's up to us where we in the future, we'll be able to transport and recreate smells. It may not be the most pleasant thing too, but to be honest, that is kind of the world of smells and kind of what we want people to
But
have
isn't
access
it in some ways like a filtering or selection because if the users don't like the smell, then you will just naturally kind of cancel or not use that scent, no?
What's kind of surprising in the industry is you actually need bad smells to make good smells. So like you can't make a cheese without some bad smell molecules.
I see.
The problem though is if you add too much of those, then it smells.
Then people will not want it. Yes,
exactly.
yes.
But to get lots of cheese, like pizza smells, you actually need molecules that don't smell very good by themselves. And you just won't be able to create some things without those molecules.
Oh, interesting. So maybe it's also a component of education or persuasion to the masses. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's more of a question like when people think about it, it's like, well, if you want to create a cheese or even like a blue cheese, some people hate the smell of blue cheese too. But in there's lots of things by itself that don't smell great. Even some very fine fragrances have ingredients in them that don't smell good by themselves, but in just the right amount actually adds a subtle note that helps a lot too. So you really can't make some really great smelling things with actually some bad smelling stuff inside of it.
Yeah, that's intriguing. And these scent, they have to obviously go through regulatory approvals and testing, right? And this is done by the EPA, you said?
So EPA and also Europe has an agency on this too. So we have and run through different tests for like make sure it's like safe, like genetically, and like kind of what we see similar to a drug company. But also a big test for us is on skin and inhalation, of course. Is it okay to breathe in? And the big thing we have to do that's not done in the drug industry is biodeg. So is it good for the environment? Because a lot of the molecules we make, so like our hope is at least to someone we have on the table here, can be made in hundreds of tons per year. So a lot of that will be washed down into the sewers and systems too. So the fragrances that are put into your laundry detergents will be washed down the tube. So you have to make sure those are safe for the environment when that happens. And that's something we both have models on internally, and we also have tests that we run.
So Osmo's new, formula and ingredients will be definitely more not hazardous than what's currently out there.
Oh yeah, we want to be much safer, and there are lots of things that are now used in different places that likely wouldn't have been able to get added to the market, but they've been around for 50 or 60 years or 100 years in some cases, so are still being used. And we know, and the whole industry knows that over the next 10 years, some of those likely will be banned and not allowed, and because there's either problems with either with people or in the environment, or sometimes both for some of these ingredients that are currently used in the industry.
And in terms of timeline, I mean, is this kind of like drug discovery where it takes 10 years to get approval, or is this a definitely more condensed timeline we're talking about?
Yeah, it is much more condensed. So we have 5 actual new ingredients that are approved for up to 1 ton. And that happened, we've only been in country 2 years, so that's 5. It's actually drugs that we have through approval. There is a more approval to get bigger, like 10 tons and above 10 tons. That takes like another year or 2 to get through. But it's a much faster turnaround. And it really comes down to there's no clinical trials in this industry. You have to pass different assays and tests for safety. But there's no clinical trials because kind of just smelling something is a clinical trial is the way we think about it internally. And as long as you pass the safety criteria and the environmental human safety, that is kind of the main kind of goals for it.
Cool. And then I also want to learn about your kind of leadership style. So, you've been with Nvidia, you've been with Spotify and Twitter, and especially interesting times too, when they were really, trying to be a catalyst and transforming industries. So what did, all of those lessons combined together do in terms of your vision and leadership for Osmo?
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing, especially because Osmo works on this, like, it's this really interesting intersection that I like working in between kind of applied research and also like the kind of just at the cutting edge of science. So a lot of things we're doing at Osmo, there is no scientific research done on it. So we're trying to get on that bleeding edge, but also in a way that's commercially viable and work in the industry. So that intersection I like a lot to work in. I've worked in a lot in my past too. And what it really comes down to is how do you think about like scientific risk in terms of commercial outcomes, and how do you iterate at the right type of scale? Because it all comes down to how do you, because we know we want to go, like I mentioned before, like the end goal for Osmo in the future is health and wellness, but there's many, many steps to get there. So how do you break it down into small concrete steps so the team can have research goals, but also that you have enough flexibility where you can see how things go and then kind of reflect on it and iterate while working through our commercial team to build products for the industry themselves too. So those three things together are a challenge, but also it's a place where I like to work. And it's kind of, it's just baked into the culture here at Osmo.
Fabulous. And I am also curious, in terms of, I guess, your personal aspiration or personal hopes of being able to digitize and preserve a smell from your personal journey, what would that be?
Yeah, for me, one that's interesting, we're actually starting to work on now too, but although it's past point for me, my kids are older, is actually capturing the smell of a baby, and particularly your baby. So can you actually capture a smell well enough where you can trigger that memory, which I think is a really vital thing that we're working towards too.
Yeah.
So it's one of the projects we have here on the R&D side. It was like, can you actually capture and recreate the smell of a baby? And I find that is a very intriguing challenge because, again, it's what I was just saying before. It's that marriage between like, lots of people will be willing to do that. So there's a commercial outcome of that too. But it's also a scientific unknown risk of, is it possible, and what's required to do that we're kind of going after.
Because this isn't a living, human being, right?
Yep.
It's not a plum, so I'm sure it's much more trickier.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like you have children, but when your children, I don't know how old they are, but by the time they grow up and are full adults, what do you think this world of scent is for them? Because it must be fully digitized by then, right?
Yeah, I think it's the two things. It's kind of my hope is in 5-10 years when we're turning into adults is we're much closer on like the health and wellness side. So there is a sensor in your house that can detect and you can kind of interact with in some way, and it can tell you if you're about to get sick. So we are getting to that point. Other side too, which we talk as much about, is this idea of what does it mean to digitize smell, and can you replay it? If you can actually get it so kind of like RGB instead of like red, green, blue, can you come up with the primary aromas of smell in a small enough set, and you're able to recreate that? Then you can have very immersive experiences in your house with smell. You can actually try a product on Amazon and smell it.
Wow, yeah.
In front of you too. So if you can really get that read and write side together, you then can have a place to understand what's going on in your body per se, but also interact with smell like you would with a monitor for like music or for like a video game.
Incredible. Well, Richard, thank you so much today for this very insightful, not just eye-opening, but a little nose-opening too conversation. It's been very refreshing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's good here.